Story 1. I heard a Padshah giving orders to kill a prisoner. The helpless fellow began to insult the king on that occasion of despair, with the tongue he had, and to use foul expressions according to the saying, "Who washes his hands of life says whatever he has in his heart." When a man is in despair, his tongue becomes long, and he is like a vanquished cat assailing a dog. In time of need, when flight is no more possible, the hand grasps the point of the sharp sword. When the king asked what he was saying, a good-natured vizier replied, "My lord, he says, those who bridle their anger and forgive men, for Allah loveth the beneficent." The king, moved with pity, forbore taking his life, but another vizier, the antagonist of the former, said, "Men of our rank ought to speak nothing but the truth in the presence of pashas. This fellow has insulted the king and spoken unbecomingly." The king, being displeased with these words, said, "That lie was more acceptable to me than this truth thou hast uttered, because the former proceeded from a conciliatory disposition and the latter from malignity. And wise men have said, a falsehood resulting in conciliation is better than a truth producing trouble. He whom the Shah follows in what he says, it is a pity if he speaks anything but what is good." The following inscription was upon the portico of the hall of Eridom: "O brother, the world remains with no one. Bind the heart to the Creator, it is enough. Rely not upon possessions and this world, because it has cherished many like thee and slain them. When the pure soul is about to depart, what boots it if one dies on a throne or on the ground?" Story 2. One of the kings of Khorasan had a vision in a dream of Sultan Mahmud 100 years after his death. His whole person appeared to have been dissolved and turned to dust, except his eyes, which were revolving in their orbits and looking about. All the sages were unable to give an interpretation, except a dervish who made his salutation and said, "He is still looking amazed how his kingdom belongs to others." Many famous men have been buried underground, of whose existence on earth not a trace has remained, and that old corpse which had been surrendered to the earth was so consumed by the soil that not a bone remains. The glorious name of Nushirvan survives in good repute, although much time elapsed since he passed away. Do good, O man, and consider life as a good fortune, the more so as when a shout is raised, a man exists no more. Story 3. I have heard that a royal prince of short stature and mean presence, whose brothers were tall and good-looking, once saw his father glancing on him with aversion and contempt, but he had the shrewdness and penetration to guess the meaning, and said, "O father, a puny intelligent fellow is better than a tall ignorant man. Neither is everything bigger in stature higher in price. A sheep is nice to eat, and an elephant is carrion. The smallest mountain on earth is Jur, nevertheless it is great with Allah in dignity and station. Hast thou not heard that a lean scholar one day said to a fat fool, 'Although an Arab horse may be weak, it is thus more worth than a stable full of asses.'" The father laughed at this sally. The pillars of the state approved of it, but the brothers felt much aggrieved. While a man says not a word, his fault and virtue are concealed. Think not that every desert is empty. Possibly it may contain a sleeping tiger. I heard that on the said occasion the king was menaced by a powerful enemy, and that when the two armies were about to encounter each other, the first who entered the battlefield was the little fellow who said, "I am not he whose back thou wilt see on the day of battle, but he whom thou shalt behold in dust and blood, who himself fights, stakes his own life in battle, but he who flees the blood of his army." After uttering these words, he rushed among the troops of the enemy, slew several warriors, and, returning to his father, made humble obeisance, and said, "O thou, to whom my person appeared contemptible, didst not believe in the impetuosity of my valor. A horse with slender girth is of use on the day of battle, not a fattened ox." It is related that the troops of the enemy were numerous, and that the kings, being few, were about to flee, but that the puny youth raised a shout, saying, "O men, take care not to put on the garments of women." These words augmented the rage of the troopers, so that they made a unanimous attack, and I heard that they gained the victory on the said occasion. The king kissed the head and eyes of his son, took him in his arms, and daily augmented his affection, until he appointed him to succeed him on the throne. His brothers became envious and placed poison in his food, but were perceived by his sister from her apartment, whereon she closed the windows violently, and the youth, shrewdly guessing the significance of the act, restrained his hands from touching the food, and said, "It is impossible that men of honor should die, and those who possess none should take their place. No one goes under the shadow of an owl, even if the Homa should disappear from the world." This state of affairs having been brought to the notice of the father, he severely reproved the brothers and assigned to each of them a different, but pleasant, district as a place of exile, till the confusion was quelled and the quarrel appeased. And it had been said that 10 dervishes may sleep under the same blanket, but that one country cannot hold 2 pashas. When a pious man eats half a loaf of bread, he bestows the other half upon dervishes. If a pasha were to conquer 7 climates, he would still in the same way covet another. Story 4. A band of Arab brigands, having taken up their position on the top of a mountain and closed the passage of caravans, the inhabitants of the country were distressed by their stratagems, and the troops of the Sultan foiled, because the robbers, having obtained an inaccessible spot on the summit of the mountain, thus had a refuge which they made their habitation. The chiefs of that region held a consultation about getting rid of the calamity, because it would be impossible to offer resistance to the robbers if they were allowed to remain. A tree which has just taken root may be moved from the place by the strength of a man, but if thou leavest it thus for a long time, thou canst not uproot it with a windlass. The source of a fountain may be stopped with a bodkin, but when it is full, it cannot be crossed on an elephant. The conclusion was arrived at to send one man as a spy, and to wait for the opportunity till the brigands departed to attack some people and leave the place empty. Then several experienced men, who had fought in battles, were dispatched to keep themselves in ambush in a hollow of the mountain. In the evening the brigands returned from their excursion with their booty, divested themselves of their arms, put away their plunder, and the first enemy who attacked them was sleep, till about a watch of the night had elapsed. The disk of the sun went into darkness. Jonah went into the mouth of the fish. The warriors leapt forth from the ambush, tied the hands of every one of the robbers to his shoulders, and brought them in the morning to the court of the king, who ordered all of them to be slain. There happened to be a youth among them, the fruit of whose vigor was just ripening, and the verdure on the rose garden of whose cheek had begun to sprout. One of the viziers, having kissed the foot of the king's throne and placed the face of intercession upon the ground, said, "This boy has not yet eaten any fruit from the garden of life, and has not yet enjoyed the pleasures of youth. I hope your majesty will generously and kindly confer an obligation upon your slave by sparing his life." The king, being displeased with this request, answered, "He whose foundation is bad will not take instruction from the good. To educate unworthy persons is like throwing nuts on a cupola. It is preferable to extirpate the race and offspring of these people, and better to dig up their roots and foundations, because it is not the part of wise men to extinguish fire and to leave burning coals, or to kill a viper and leave its young ones. If a cloud should rain the water of life, never sip it from the branch of a willow tree. Associate not with a base fellow, because thou canst not eat sugar from a mat reed. The vizier heard these sentiments, approved of them, nolens volens, praised the opinion of the king, and said, "What my lord has uttered is the very truth itself, because if the boy had been brought up in the company of those wicked men, he would have become one of themselves. But your slave hopes that he will, in the society of pious men, profit by education, and will acquire the disposition of wise persons. Being yet a child, the rebellious and perverse temper of that band has not yet taken hold of his nature, and there is a tradition of the Prophet that every infant is born with an inclination for Islam, but his parents make him a Jew, a Christian, or a Majusi. The spouse of Lot became a friend of wicked persons. His race of prophets became extinct. The dog of the companions of the cave for some days associated with good people and became a man." When the vizier had said these words, and some of the king's courtiers had added their intercession to his, the king no longer desired to shed the blood of the youth, and said, "I grant the request, although I disapprove of it." "Knowest thou not what Zal said to the hero Rostam? An enemy cannot be held despicable or helpless. I have seen many a water from a paltry spring becoming great and carrying off a camel with its load." In short, the vizier brought up the boy delicately, with every comfort, and kept masters to educate him, till they had taught him to address persons in elegant language, as well as to reply, and he had acquired every accomplishment. One day the vizier hinted at his talents in the presence of the king, asserting that the instructions of wise men had taken effect upon the boy and had expelled his previous ignorance from his nature. The king smiled at these words and said, "At last a wolf's whelp will be a wolf, although he may grow up with a man." After 2 years had elapsed, a band of robbers in the locality joined him, tied the knot of friendship, and, when the opportunity presented itself, he killed the vizier with his son, took away untold wealth, and succeeded to the position of his own father in the robber cave where he established himself. The king, informed of the event, took the finger of amazement between his teeth and said, "How can a man fabricate a good sword of bad iron? O sage, who is nobody becomes not somebody by education. The rain, and the beneficence of whose nature there is no flaw, will cause tulips to grow in a garden and weeds in bad soil. Saline earth will not produce hyacinths. Throw not away thy seeds or work thereon. To do good to wicked persons is like doing evil to good men." Story 5. I saw at the palace gate of Ogilmish the son of a military officer who was endued with marvelous intellect, sagacity, perception, and shrewdness. Also the signs of future greatness manifested themselves on his forehead whilst yet a small boy. From his head intelligence caused the star of greatness to shine. In short, he pleased the Sultan because he had a beautiful countenance and a perfect understanding, and philosophers have said, "Power consists in accomplishments, not in wealth and greatness and intellect, not in years." His companions, being envious, made an attempt upon his life and desired to kill him, but their endeavors remained fruitless. What can a foe do when the friend is kind? The king asked, "What is the cause of their enmity to thee?" He replied, "Under the shadow of the monarchy of my lord, I have satisfied my contemporaries, except the envious, who will not be contented but by the decline of my prosperity. And may the monarchy and good fortune of my lord be perpetual. I may so act as not to hurt the feelings of anyone, but what can I do to an envious man dissatisfied with himself? Die, O envious man, for this is a malady, deliverance from which can be obtained only by death. Unfortunate men sometimes ardently desire the decline of prosperous men and wealth and dignity. If in daytime bat-eyed persons do not see, is it the fault of the fountain of light, the sun? Thou justly wishest that 1,000 such eyes should be blind rather than the sun dark. Story 6. It is narrated that one of the kings of Persia had stretched forth his tyrannical hand to the possessions of his subjects and had begun to oppress them so violently that in consequence of his fraudulent extortions they dispersed in the world and chose exile on account of the affliction entailed by his violence. When the population had diminished, the prosperity of the country suffered. The treasury remained empty. On every side enemies committed violence. Who desires succor in the day of calamity? Say to him, be generous in times of prosperity. The slave with the ring in his ear, if not cherished, will depart. Be kind, because then a stranger will become thy slave. One day the Shahnameh was read in his assembly, the subject being the ruin of the dominion of Zohak and the reign of Fairlin. The vizier asked the king how it came to pass that Fairlin, who possessed neither treasure nor land nor a retinue, established himself upon the throne. He replied, as thou hast heard. The population enthusiastically gathered round him and supported him so that he attained royalty. The vizier said, as the gathering around of the population is the cause of royalty, then why dispersest thou the population? Perhaps thou hast no desire for royalty. It is best to cherish the army as thy life, because the sultan reigns by means of his troops. The king asked, what is the reason for gathering around of the troops and the population? He replied, a Padishah must practice justice that they may gather around him, and clemency that they may dwell in safety under the shadow of his government. But thou possessest neither of those qualities. A tyrannic man cannot be a sultan, as a wolf cannot be a shepherd. A Padishah who establishes oppression destroys the basis of the wall of his own reign. The king, displeased with the advice of his censorious vizier, sent him to prison. Shortly afterwards, the sons of the king's uncle rose in rebellion, desirous of recovering the kingdom of their father. The population, which had been reduced to the last extremity by the king's oppression and scattered, now assembled around them and supported them, till he lost control of the government and they took possession of it. The Padishah who allows his subjects to be oppressed will in his day of calamity become a violent foe. Be at peace with subjects and sit safe from attacks of foes, because his subjects are the army of a just Shah on Shah. Story 7. A Padishah was in the same boat with a Persian slave who had never before been at sea and experienced the inconvenience of a vessel. He began to cry and to tremble to such a degree that he could not be pacified by kindness, so that at last the king became displeased, as the matter could not be remedied. In that boat there happened to be a philosopher who said, with thy permission I shall quiet him. The Pasha replied, it would be a great favor. The philosopher ordered the slave to be thrown into the water so that he swallowed some of it, whereon he was caught and pulled by his hair to the boat, to the stern of which he clung with both his hands. Then he sat down in a corner and became quiet. This appeared strange to the king, who knew not what wisdom there was in the proceeding, and asked for it. The philosopher replied, before he had tasted the calamity of being drowned, he knew not the safety of the boat. Thus also a man does not appreciate the value of immunity from misfortune until it has befallen him. O thou full man, barley bread pleases thee not, She is my sweetheart who appears ugly to thee. To the tourists of paradise, purgatory seems hell. Ask the denizens of hell. To them, purgatory is paradise. There is a difference between him whose friend is in his arms and him whose eyes of expectation are upon the door. Story 8. Mahmud's being asked what fault the viziers of his father had committed that he imprisoned them, replied, I discovered no fault. I saw that boundless awe of me had taken root in their hearts, but that they had no full confidence in my promises. Wherefore I apprehended that they, fearing calamities would befall them, might attempt my life, and I acted according to the maxim of sages who have said, Dread him who dreads thee, O sage. Although thou couldst cope with 100 like him, seest thou not when the cat becomes desperate, how he plucks out with his claws the eyes of a tiger? The viper stings the shepherd's foot, because it fears he will strike his head with a stone. Story 9. An Arab king was sick in his state of decrepitude, so that all hopes of life were cut off. The trooper entered the gate with the good news that a certain fort had been conquered by the good luck of the king, that the enemies had been captured, and that the whole population of the district had been reduced to obedience. The king heaved a deep sigh and replied, This message is not for me, but for my enemies, namely the heirs of the kingdom. I spent my precious life in hopes, alas, that every desire of my heart will be fulfilled. My wishes were realized, but to what profit, since there is no hope that my past life will return? The hand of fate has struck the drum of departure. O my 2 eyes, bid farewell to the head. O palm, forearm, and arm of my hand, all take leave from each other. Death, the foe of my desires, has fallen upon me. For the last time, O friends, pass near me. My life has elapsed in ignorance. I have done nothing. Be on your guard. Story 10. I was constantly engaged in prayer at the head of the prophet Yahya's tomb in the cathedral mosque of Damascus, when one of the Arab kings, notorious for his injustice, happened to arrive on a pilgrimage to it, who offered his supplications and asked for compliance with his needs. The dervish and the plutocrat are slaves on the floor of this threshold, and those who are the wealthiest are the most needy. Then he said to me, Dervishes, being zealous and voracious in their dealings, unite thy mind to mine, for I am apprehensive of a powerful enemy. I replied, Have mercy upon thy feeble subjects, that thou mayest not be injured by a strong foe. With a powerful arm and the strength of the wrist to break the 5 fingers of a poor man is sin. Let him be afraid who spares not the fallen, because if he falls, no one will take hold of his hand. Whoever sows bad seed and expects good fruit has cudgeled his brains for naught and begotten vain imaginations. Extract the cotton from thy ears and administer justice to thy people. And if thou failest to do so, there is a day of retribution. The sons of Adam are limbs of each other, having been created of one essence. When the calamity of time afflicts one limb, the other limbs cannot remain at rest. If thou hast no sympathy for the troubles of others, thou art unworthy to be called by the name of a man.